Victoria and Brooke for opening up Get for us so we can use this amazing space. I hope everyone has been here before. If you have not, you should definitely come back during daylight hours when it's hopping. It's super special. So we are here tonight to talk about cannabis and autism, and you're going to hear some information about it, and you're going to hear sort of how we both ended up here, as well as some of our personal anecdotes. That's good because we're kind of funny, hopefully. And also, so I'll just get started. I'm Wendy Ross. I am a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, which means that my patients are kids, and I try to understand their development, whether they have ADHD or a learning disability or autism. And then more importantly, I try to make sure that they have plans where their educational, therapeutic, and medical plans are kind of integrated, right? So it's not a la carte for the parents, because you know, if your child has any one of those issues, you kind of have it as a family, right? So that's part of what I do, and I love that because half the day I get to play with kids, and then the other half of what I do is work to create opportunities in the community, and we do that by creating neurodiverse friendly healthcare at Jefferson. And I have to just acknowledge Caroline here, who has worked with us quite often. Sorry, I hope I didn't put you on the spot. But we work on neurodiverse friendly healthcare. We also continue to work on other projects in the community. We've been going to Phillies games, but we do not have playoff tickets, I'm sorry to say. And we'll soon be going to Sixers games. We do a lot of projects. One thing I just want to put a plug in for, on Friday we have a free conference on Zoom. It's an international conference about neurodiversity and the built environment. And we have designers, architects, individuals with neurodiverse individuals from all over the world participating in that. So you're welcome to attend any part of that. It's free. So you can get information about registering that. Anyway, I'm super excited to be here. And most importantly, I'm super excited to be here with Erica. And when we first started to look into the use of cannabis for autism was before it was actually legal in the state of Pennsylvania, and there were very few resources with information. But I was really lucky. Actually, I think Brooke introduced us, right? And really, I think, well, I'll speak to myself, but in my practice of medicine, I learn a lot from my families. I'm not, I'm humble enough to say that that has always been the case, and I think, frankly, most physicians should operate that way. So I have learned so much from Erica, and then we've been doing some research together, which we'll talk about soon. And because cannabis is not something that is like a medicine that I write a prescription for, actually when I have patients that are interested in pursuing the use of cannabis, I direct them to Erica. So we were talking about just putting together what I know and the research I have and Erica's information. So I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I just wanted to sort of say that she's just a wealth of information and has started an amazing organization. I also have to say that I don't receive any funding from either Hope Grows or Ilera. Just so you know, we're not here to sell you pot. I wish I could say there was some marijuana in those great cookies back there, but sadly they're just cookies, so don't get too excited. All right, here.
Thank you, Wendy. Hi, I am Erica Daniels. I am the founder of Hope Grows for Autism. Oh, thank you. And I am the mother of Leo, who is 17 years old, who is autistic, and Scarlett, who is 15 years old and is super awesome, smart AP Psych student. And she's here helping tonight with her friend Kayla, so thank you, girls, for helping out. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Victoria, Brooke, and Get Cafe. There's so many people in the room here tonight that I wouldn't be here just, mind, body, spirit, and professionally or otherwise without. So that's really awesome. Thank you to our sponsor, Ilera Healthcare and Apothecarium. Fantastic. We really appreciate your support in hosting events like this. Thank you, Zilera Therapeutics, who we'll talk about a little later, provided some of the data that we're going to share with you tonight. And finally, thank you to Dr. Ross for being here tonight and for being here with me and for always walking alongside of us and really being so open, and not just open, but helping facilitate new solutions and new treatments and new inclusion ideas for all of our families. So I'm so grateful for you in particular tonight, and we're going to talk to you about medical cannabis for your autism symptoms tonight.
Okay, so I would be remiss if we didn't talk about sort of the past of cannabis, right? Cannabis used to be really a criminalized entity, and people went to jail for having marijuana. There are still people in jail. In fact, I think Biden is just starting to release more people that were incarcerated for the use and selling of marijuana. And you know, when I was in high school, the kids that were doing marijuana were the kids that weren't graduating, or they were taking sort of the long route to graduation. And I think, you know, whether I liked it or not, I think I'm fairly open-minded, but I probably had a lot of unconscious bias about marijuana, to be totally honest with you. But then something really peculiar started to happen. In my practice, families with kids on the spectrum started to tell me that they were giving their kids marijuana. And they were going to Colorado, and actually some of them were getting arrested and spent some time in jail. But some of them, you know, were actually really happy with some of the results that they were getting from the use of different formulations of cannabis. So I began to sort of think, I wonder what's happening, you know? And then I'll just share a little bit of my personal experience. I think really what started to open my eyes quite a bit was, if you'll notice, like up here, and over there, laughing man, was my husband, and he had colon cancer. And it was sort of funny because when he was first diagnosed, the first wave of people wanted to bring us food, right? I think we all know how that works. And then the second wave wanted to give him marijuana. And we were kind of like, first of all, we didn't know so many people had marijuana. But we were like, wow, that's sort of surprising. We weren't judging, we were just like surprised, you know. And we're kind of like, oh, that's not really like our thing. And then about 2 years in, we got my husband Michael a medical marijuana card, and actually we got it out of state. It's too late to arrest me now. So we got it out of state in New York, and we went to see a recommender, because when you want cannabis, you don't normally, unless the physician is actually a recommender, you go to a recommender, and she made some recommendations, and recommended, we're going to talk more about this, but like some CBD, which is a part of the marijuana plant, for during the week at night to help we sleep, and more of the THC, the psychoactive part, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, for times when he was getting chemotherapy. I don't know if you can see, but he's wearing a chemotherapy pump. He's actively getting chemotherapy at home there. So, and it was really a revelation to both of us, because it helped so much more than all of the medications that he was provided with at the hospital. So I began to really open my mind to sort of what's happening. And then Pennsylvania became the first state. I think it was like, I want to say 2016. Yeah, Pennsylvania became the first state in the country where autism was an indication for medical marijuana. So that really opened a lot of doors for families. And also other conditions that frequently co-occur with marijuana became indicators, like anxiety, for example. So that was sort of how I came to this. And now, I began to think more of cannabis as a medication, unless it's something that's sort of like the bad kids did in high school, right? So it really sort of changed. So I just want to say, okay, next slide. So let's talk about what is this marijuana. So it's been really hard to study nationally in the United States because it's not legal nationally. Like in some states it's legal for medical use, in some states it's legal for recreational use, in some states it's both, in some states it's neither. And so it makes it really hard to do studies the way we would study like a typical medication in medicine, where you'd want to make sure you got different populations across the country and different all different kinds of people, rural areas, city areas. So it's been really hard, and the studies that have been done just in certain states, and most of the studies actually have been done out of this country in places like Israel, where it is legal. So most of the information we have is from different sources than we would normally, in this country at least, test regular kind of allopathic medications. But I'm just going to give you some down and dirty information, is that the plant has several parts. The few that we're going to focus on tonight, one is THC, which is the part that, you know, gets you stoned or is psychoactive, as we say as doctors. We're not supposed to say get stoned. But, and then intoxicated. CBD is the part, too loud?
No, we should just need to switch the battery.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. We thought if we could create some sort of a seating. Okay, we good to go. All right, so I'm going to go back to the pot. So there's the THC, which is the psychoactive part, and then there's the CBD, which is non-psychoactive. And then there's other things like terpenes, which give it sort of the flavor and taste and things like that, and the flavonoids. But what's really interesting is when they started to look at the marijuana plant, they realized that you can separate the THC and you can separate the CBD, but actually they work better together. They kind of potentiate each other. It's called an entourage effect. So you can obtain each of these separately, but they're more therapeutic in some kind of a combination. And if you go to a store, they're sold in different ratios, from more THC to more CBD. And usually a recommender, or sometimes the recommender will make a general recommendation, sometimes the pharmacist can actually help you figure out what formulation you want to have and you know, when to take it. And I'm going to leave Erica to talk a little bit more about that, the down and dirty practical. I'm going to talk more about the scientific. The other thing that's sort of interesting, I always thought a marijuana plant was a marijuana plant, but there are a lot of different strains of marijuana. And so that's also something to consider. But just in general terms, there's the THC, the CBD, which are what we're going to focus on tonight, and sort of finding out which ratio of those can be helpful. These work in what's called the endocannabinoid system. Yeah. So the endocannabinoid system is a system like any other in our body. Like we have a nervous system, we have a GI system, we actually have an endocannabinoid system. And there are receptors in this system, the CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. The 1 receptors are in our brain and in our nervous system, and the CB2 receptors are sort of throughout our body, and they're sort of linked to our immune cells. And it's really interesting because they think, you know, in addition to, you know, we're going to talk about autism tonight, but we think it also, that cannabis has also other therapeutic effects in decreasing inflammation and helping people who have autoimmune diseases. You hear about people taking cannabis for MS. So that's probably because of the work it's doing on the CB1 and CB2 receptors. The other thing to know is that in our nervous system, the way our brains work, or we have these nerve cells called neurons, and they communicate with neurotransmitters. And there's an interaction between, especially the CB1 part of the endocannabinoid system, and sort of these neurons and how they're transmitting messages in the brain and in the central nervous system. So it says here, you know, regulating the transmissions in the brain. So I mean, this was kind of new to me. This wasn't something I learned in medical school, but this is a real thing. And what we're finding is that the endocannabinoid system in individuals on the spectrum is not completely typical, like so many things of individuals on the spectrum. And, you know, in fact, when we've looked at the nervous systems of individuals on the spectrum, people who have autism over the course of their lifetime are 30% more likely to develop seizure disorders at some point, at any point in their lives. And there are some individuals on the spectrum where they have abnormal EEGs, which is the brain waves that we measure to look for seizure activity. And even if they're not having necessarily, it's not indicative of a specific seizure or a specific part of the brain, there's something different in some individuals on the spectrum with how their brains are firing, functioning, even if it's not a fully developed seizure, there's something different about sort of the electrical currents that's going on. So it makes sense to me that when you look at a different endocannabinoid system and a different kind of, that's why it's called neurodiversity, right? Because it's neurologically different or neurologically divergent, that there might be something that can be helpful to those on the spectrum that works in the nervous system. So Erica's going to talk about some of the common delivery methods.
So in every state it's different, but in Pennsylvania here we have a handful of delivery methods that are legal and available through your local dispensary. The first one over here in the bottle is a tincture, and that's pretty typically what you see most children, especially with autism, using, because it's very easy to control the dosing as opposed to some of the other methods that could be more concentrated or not as easily measured. The one on the top over here, this is a syringe, like a concentrate, so you would think of what they call RSO or Rick Simpson oil, which tends to frequently be used by cancer patients and pain management patients. I do know some families that have used RSO with their children, but it's a very strong paste-like substance, and you have to be really, really careful with it because you can take too much. I've actually tried it once in my life, and I felt like I was on another planet. So if that gives you any indication of how strong it can be. Then you have your typical capsules, and those come in varying strengths and varying ratios of CBD to THC. On the bottom you have what's called a vape pen, so that would be a way to smoke the cannabis oil or concentrate through a vaporizer. And typically we don't want children to vape or smoke, so we wouldn't even talk about that. However, I do know in some really extreme cases where patients are having really significant violent outbursts that it's a very quick delivery method, and it works very quickly. So some people tend to look at that as an emergency type of solution. And then at the end you have your edibles or gummies. Those, I think, are not readily available in Pennsylvania. You'll find them a lot of times in California and Colorado. What makes me a little nervous about those with children is, I know that my son would be like, oh, there's gummies, like I'm going to eat a bunch of candy. And so that makes me nervous about gummies and children. And on the bottom right is what we call flower, or when we were growing up, we had called it bud or weed or different kinds of things. The word for it now is flower, so if you hear people say flower and they're talking about cannabis, that's what they mean. And although it's not technically legal to smoke flower in Pennsylvania, I think when people leave the dispensary, they may do as they please, or there are different tools that are able to vaporize that as well. That wouldn't be, linked exactly to smoking or something like that. So those are the common delivery methods.
Great. So now I want to talk about some of the positive and negative effects of cannabis. So I'm going to start with some positive stuff. This is Charlotte. I don't know how many of you may have heard of something called Charlotte's Web. I don't mean the book by E.B. White, but Charlotte was a young girl who was having hundreds of seizures a day. She could not get through her day. She had what's called intractable or unstoppable seizures, and no medication was helping her. No seizure medication was helping her at all. So they started to use a trial of CBD. Now this was straight CBD, no THC, and it brought her seizures down. Like I think she was having only at most like one or two a day, maybe a few. It was a considerable difference from having hundreds of seizures a day and not being able to get through your day to suddenly being able to live a life. And so this started to come out and reach the popular media around 2013. And there were studies, because CBD is not they weren't like national studies because they were still not illegal, but there were studies that were done that were beginning to show that the CBD was extremely helpful, especially when there were no other options with intractable seizures. And it really changed the trajectory of her life, and it began to be sold as a drug called Epidiolex, which is now, prescribed by physicians, and also there's still Charlotte's Web that you can get in several places. I just want to take a moment to say that we're not suggesting that you all go, we're kind of joking around a little bit, but we're not suggesting that you all get stoned or that marijuana is for everyone and we should all go out and relax. And, I just also, I need to tell you that there are some negative potential side effects of cannabis, whether it be somebody who's using too much of the medical formulations or somebody who's, getting it elsewhere. One of the downsides of getting it sort of on the street are that you don't know if it's mixed with other things. So if you are using it therapeutically in some way, you definitely want to try to get a card. Especially in Pennsylvania for autism, it's an indication. So there's no reason to be going down to the corner somewhere where it could be laced, God forbid, with something else. So first of all. Second of all, you can use too much cannabis, right? And there's something, it was interesting to me, I had never known this before, but marijuana can be used as an antiemetic to both decrease your feelings of nausea if you're sick, and that's how in part it really helped my husband. But it can also, if you take too much of it, you can get what's called a cyclical vomiting syndrome, and it can make you vomit and seek out hot water. It's this huge phenomenon. It can also affect your processing of information. So I worry about it a little bit in kids that might have learning disabilities that are using too much, or they're using it to escape the stress of having a learning disability and going to school because it can impact their learning. But on the other hand, not only can it be really therapeutic with things like seizures, and there's definitely data and anecdotal evidence to support that, but I know plenty of my patients and individuals that are now young adults that are very successful college students that are on the spectrum and that have also anxiety, who have medical marijuana cards and are taking small doses of marijuana a few times a week, and it's extremely helpful. But I just want to give a balanced approach. We're not here to tell you all to get stoned, but we're here to open your mind to the possibility of, when used appropriately and correctly, that it can be super helpful, but it is something like anything else that you don't want to use to excess or extremes. So it's just something to think about.
So we just talked about CBD, and I think one of the misconceptions that people don't understand the difference really between CBD and medical cannabis, and it's not all CBD, and if it's lab tested and if it's regulated and things like that. So CBD is sort of readily available, and you can find it anywhere. But if you tried CBD and it hasn't worked for you, don't think that medical cannabis won't work, or you've really tried medical cannabis. So when we talk about medical cannabis, we're talking about the marijuana plant, or I prefer to use the word cannabis. It's more medically appropriate, and it's just more appropriate for our society today. Marijuana has a negative connotation for a variety of reasons. And so when you look at the difference, these tinctures on the bottom here, yes, they happen to be from our sponsor, Alera Healthcare, but they also happen to be formulated by a brilliant young scientist who is not here today, who I still work with. And these formulations are actually made to help you with specific symptoms or ailments, or feel a certain way, whether that be you want to calm down, or you need more energy, or you have symptoms of autism or anxiety, or a variety of different conditions. I think there's about 24 conditions now that you can get medical cannabis for in Pennsylvania. So just be mindful when you are shopping to make sure that, and like Dr. Ross was saying, you want to make sure that you're using a dispensary, that you're getting it from a reliable source, and that you are using the appropriate formulation for the symptoms that you're trying to treat.
So at Jefferson, I don't know, Jefferson actually has a center for cannabis and hemp. It's called the Lambert Center. It's actually one of the things I was interested in when I came to Jefferson, because autism was just becoming an indication for medical marijuana. And I'm going to tell you why I was especially interested about this. I mean, I have patients with anxiety too, but for autism I was specifically interested because when we look at what's available to families with kids with autism, especially, autism's a spectrum, right? So, on one end you might have somebody who's really cognitively brilliant, a college student or a young adult, and maybe has some anxiety, and maybe a little bit of CBD or THC might be helpful. And then you also have, it's a spectrum, kids who are nonverbal, who have a lot of behaviors, right? So when we are nonverbal, our behavior becomes our communication. And think about how frustrating it is to be nonverbal. And there are patients and kids of mine that I also know just in the region with autism that have a lot of aggressive behaviors that are either self-injurious or injurious to their family members or to anyone around them. And as a clinician, the only two FDA-approved medications for autism, even still, are aripiprazole and also risperidone. And these medications are atypical antipsychotics, and they're kind of dirty because they can cause obesity, high blood pressure, hypertension, and diabetes. And so then, if you have somebody who's non-communicative, it might help with their behaviors. Like if we don't know what the behaviors, what's driving the behaviors, if we can't treat the cause, or what we might be doing to accidentally reinforce those behaviors, these medications can help them, but probably only for a period of time. And then we get really large people, like really big, heavy people that are still non-communicative if they haven't gotten really good therapies, and now they're still aggressive and they're on these medications. And there are other medications that as a clinician I use with my kids with autism that, if they have comorbid ADHD, I will treat them with ADHD medications. If they have anxiety, I might use something like Zoloft or Prozac or a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or, for depression or anxiety. I will reach for almost anything before I will use risperidol or Abilify, because I see what happens when kids end up, and it's not that they're terrible. Like, some kids really do need those medications, and ideally they get those and the behaviors recede and they become more accessible for therapy, and then they begin to get tapered down. That's the ideal, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And so when I saw families begin to use cannabis, and I saw that it was helping, maybe not all of them, but some of them, in my mind that was a big win. And that had a lot to do with decreasing whatever conscious or unconscious bias I may have had about the product. And so I've been wanting to look more and more into it, and most recently in the past year, Hope Grows had amazing survey data that they had never really analyzed specifically about what the individuals that were using their products or on Erica's social media were saying. So we kind of thought, let's take a look at this data and see what we find. So we started to look at it, and here's our poster, and here's the actual poster. Here's just like a reprint of the poster. And I just want to say the reason that this poster is actually physically here now is that we just had this printed because next week I'm going to the Society for Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics conference, which is in Colorado, but where this was accepted for presentation. So this is just to show that more and more cannabis products are becoming part of mainstream medicine and things that are in our toolbox. And what we did was we looked at the data from these surveys. There were 50 surveys that we looked at, and I'm just going to read from the poster, but you guys are also welcome to come up and see it later. 18 had severe autism. 13 reported more moderate symptoms. So severe would be like a lot less verbal, having a lot more behaviors, a lot less fewer social skills, And then the majority of the respondents were trying to treat one or more symptoms. And you can also come up and look up, I don't want to spend all of my time up here, but looking at anxiety, irritability, meltdown. But it was mainly the irritability and some of those OCD kind of behaviors that really got in their way. Some of the more self-injurious behaviors. And a good percentage of them did see, I mean, not everybody, but a good percentage of people did see results where some of these challenges of behavior, there were measures of quality of life that were done, but they also reported that a decrease in the challenging behaviors. Now, a lot of people will say, well, could this be like a placebo effect? You just, like, you're taking something so you think that it's helping. And that might be, but I would sort of also posit that if something is a placebo effect, something's still working, right? So I don't know, it's so funny, in science placebo kind of got this bad name, but there's at least some perception that something's improving. So this was not like a standard controlled study. This was from a group of people who were using the product, who took the time to fill out the survey. We're hoping to do more studies and to look more at this, but this was kind of interesting. And I'm just going to throw it in now. I think there's a slide later, I'm sorry. But when families come and talk to me about, they heard about this, I'm always kind of very open-minded about it, because especially if it's a child where we're looking at maybe an atypical antipsychotic, like if I were the parent and even as the doctor, I'd want to try something like this first too, so hi.
It's okay.
So anyway, so I always prefer that families are really open with me about what they want to do, and so that we can help monitor progress together.
Look at the paper. John. Look at. Look at
Leo, everybody.
paper.
Leo's entered the room.
Look at the. Then John.
Oh, still mine. I'm sorry.
Paper.
And then
John, paper.
Bonnie Goldstein is an amazing physician who's on the West Coast, and she's actually done a number of studies.
John,
and there's a
paper.
table here about some
Nail.
of them. Again, these aren't national studies because
Nail.
you can't do national studies yet for chemists.
Nail.
But if you look at them, some of them were only a couple months, some of them were 6 months, some of them were for a year. And there's a whole range of improvement. But you can see, like in one study, 30% reported significant improvement in some of the more aggressive symptoms. 53% reported moderate improvement. There's 6 said slight improvement. 8% said no change. And that kind of makes sense to me, right? Because autism itself is a heterogeneous, which means it looks many different ways. So, but there's a lot of improving in sleep and anxiety. So there is data out there. It's not the kind of data, it is real scientific data. It would be great to be able to have a national study, but there are some really good studies that are showing improvement. And again, not in everybody, but a lot of drugs don't improve everybody, so those are some of the things, and you can come look at this. And Bonnie Goldstein actually has a great book called Cannabis as Medicine, which I thought was really helpful for understanding some of the thought process behind the use of cannabis, and some of the thinking she does when she recommends different formulations, and it also talks about in more detail about some of these studies. So.
So it's interesting that Leo just arrived. My next slide, I'm going to just give a little bit of a trigger warning, because we do not have an autistic meltdown that I'm going to show you, but we do have a few minutes of Leo when he was very young, having a very hard time before his cannabis. I talked to Leo about it this morning. We looked at the videos together, and I told him that I was going to show you guys tonight. The reason why I'm showing you this now is because we're going from research and collecting data and clinical trials and real world data, but really when you're a parent and you're at home, or you're a person struggling yourself, the research is is just how the patient responds, or how your child responds, and how your family responds. That was just in the morning when Leo woke up before he had his cannabis medicine. He was irritable and unhappy. He was irritable and unhappy all the time. I'm a single mom. I have another child who I shared with you about, and I was very desperate, and I didn't know what I was going to do and how I was going to take care of everybody. I couldn't work. I couldn't get a caregiver. I couldn't leave, he was just upset all the time. He would have bigger meltdowns that were maybe 5-6 days a week and could last anywhere from 40 minutes to 3 hours, and nothing we did would stop it, no matter what it was. And so in the time when cannabis was sort of becoming legal in Pennsylvania, I have some very good friends and moms at Hope Grows for Autism, and we and I won't say if they're here today or not, but we took turns literally traveling to Colorado and California and looking for medicine for our kids. And so this video shows Leo a little bit before he had his medicine in the morning, and then about 35 minutes later. Hi, Leo. I'm good. How are you? Do you feel better? Look at me.
Mommy.
Look at Mom. Do you feel better?
Yes.
Love you. So I don't know if you could hear that video sound that well, but it's just like, this is my research, you know, and so I was sold, and I knew that it helped my child so much, and then I just knew that I had to help other families locate it and find it. And in the beginning I didn't tell anyone. I was scared and nervous and felt stigmatized, but little by little I started to talk about it, and here we are today, and thank you all. And especially, again, Dr. Ross, for being so open to talking about it. And you know, this is my research. Really? And what happened from there was I started Hope Grows for Autism, and we were just a small group of moms, sort of underground, going back and forth between and bringing back medicine for our kids, and we started to go out and educate, and we would educate, but the problem was when families would go into a dispensary, there was for their grow facilities, but there was one who actually kept that promise, and that was originally Lara Healthcare, who's in the room today, so thank you very much to them, and Michelle Molesky, who's back there. And the other was my dear friend and colleague, who's not here tonight, but we do have someone from Zalera here tonight, Dr. Dare Adamusa from Zalera Therapeutics. And since day one, I think Brooke and I went into his office. She came with me, and we were real skeptical because people just kind of kept telling us what we wanted to hear, but no one was following through. So we sort of went in, and we didn't really expect anything to come out of it. But what came out of it was the Hope range of products, which are available in Pennsylvania through Alera Healthcare. And you know, I will disclose I am a consultant for Zalera Therapeutics, and I do work with their company. I do get paid for doing that. And on the flip side of that, we did that because we wanted something that worked for kids. And so, well, not just kids, but people with autism symptoms. And so what we've been able to do as an organization and as a partner of Zalera is to collect data But really, we went into the lab and we took data, and we did it even just from this room that you're sitting in right now. Different members of the community did our flavor taste testing guide. And we used all of that information to put together what we thought were the best 2 choices as a safe place to start. This is not to say this is the right choice for everyone, but for me, I wanted to make sure that families could go in and find a safe place to start with medical cannabis, and that they would have the data and the support to support them in that. And since you can visit their website, ZaleraHope.com, they have a white paper about some dosing and different things. That they're able to do more clinical work in Australia because the legislation and legalities are different there. So they're kind of ahead of the curve over there with the research. And where is Leo now? Leo's here somewhere outside. But I was literally saying today that, so he's 17 now. I mean, he was maybe 10 or 11 when you saw him in that video. And Leo had plans with not only one friend, but 2 friends today. So that's something I never thought was possible if you just see how much he was struggling in the videos when he was young. And these are just some fun pictures. Dr. Barry from Growing Smiles was here earlier, or she's here still, a fabulous pediatric dentist if you need one. Leo loves her and is really successful with her. And Leo has the most amazing job here. And he works here and he loves it here. And Victoria is his manager and Brooke is his boss. Yeah. So this is Victoria and Leo making bacon, one of his favorite things to do. And of course, family and beach pictures and his friend from school. So I'm just really grateful that Leo is where he is now, and a part of that has to do with a lot of people in this room. So thank you.
So, it kind of dates me to say how old this study was, but about 10, 12 years ago, David Mandel from Penn did a study of families that were giving their children with autism, well, it used to be what we called alternative or complementary medicine, but now we more refer to as integrative medicine as it gets more and more accepted in the allopathic world and the traditional medical world, and it starts to be studied by the NIH. In fact, some of the studies that are done in cannabis are not only funded by the NIH, but they're also co-funded by the American military, which is just sort of interesting. But more, what David Mandel found, and again this was like 10 years ago, it's hard to believe, is that about 90% of parents with kids on the spectrum were providing their kids with something, which at the time was called CAM, or complementary and alternative medicine, but only like 2% were telling their doctors, people like me. And so, I mean, that's obviously not a good solution, right? So it's unclear why that happened, if it happened because they were afraid that their traditional MDs and DOs would be judgmental or would in some way not be supportive. Sometimes, to be honest, with less reputable other practitioners, I think that was kind of fed into that. You know what I mean? I'd like to think most of us are fairly open-minded because most of us want to be hopeful. Like, that's why we went to medical school. So we have 2 cartoons here to sort of show the different sides of what you might see. But in one, the doctor says, I'm sorry, I can't prescribe marijuana. Boredom's not a medical problem. Like somebody who's whatever, kind of negative. And this one is just this guy says about the medical marijuana study, I'm totally stoked about the results. Anyway, I'd like to think that most of us are not either one of these doctors, but are kind of in between. And my approach when people come to me with anything that's integrative, whether it be cannabis or anything, is I'll kind of give them what I think is sort of the good, the bad, the best, the ugly, whatever. There are certain treatments that I think are quite dangerous for kids with autism, like chelation. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. Kids have died having that done to them. I will tell you right off, like, no. Some are super expensive, but there's no evidence for, and, say, look, tell people that, like, if you have the resources and you want to try this, I'm not going to stop you, but I haven't seen any evidence to support this. And some things like cannabis, there are studies to support it. And, my preference is that parents tell me so that we can partner and collaborate. And the only thing I would say in this instance is that we don't want to start, let's say, the first speech and therapy session and cannabis on the same day, right? Because then we don't know what's helpful. Like, you want to have at least a scientific mindset about it. You want to do one thing at a time. And you want to sort of have parents sit with me and think about, like, what are their goals? Like, what are the symptoms that they're targeting? And some of those things are on this poster, like, what are the quality of life issues? For Erica, you saw that was, there was a lot of irritability. He wasn't getting through his day, and then there wasn't, right? And now he is going out. And I don't think that's just because of the cannabis, but it's obviously that it contributed. So I think, if you do decide to do some cannabis, you have a child on the spectrum, I would really encourage you to share with your doctor. And I would like to think that most of us are fairly open-minded and really only want to help you. And this is no longer, this is approved in the state of Pennsylvania. It's legal. There might still be some unconscious bias about it, but I'd like to think that most doctors really want to be helpful. And there's not a lot when we look at medications, like I was saying, in our arsenal. There's a lot of therapies. So I just want to encourage you to really be sharing with your physicians. And, if they're completely closed-minded, you might want to rethink in general, do you want somebody totally closed-minded? But because this is now more and more widely accepted, and it can be very helpful for some people if done correctly or thoughtfully.
And I'll just share my quick story. So I was super over-prepared when I went to my child's pediatrician to talk about cannabis. I actually brought the cannabis with me so I could prove it and show it to her, because I knew I would have a hard time. And this was, 4 or 5 years, however many, 2016, 17, somewhere in there. But I took some data, and I took some video data before and after. So I think sometimes, if you do have a physician who, they should all be like Wendy. We should all be that lucky. But if you do have someone who's, a little more skeptical, bring some information with you. It can't hurt. So formulations and dosing. This is dosing. Everybody wants to know what to give and how much to give, and that is the $1 million question, right? So I've shared with you about the HOPE formulations and how they were formulated with autism symptoms in mind. And the book on the right, Cannabis is Medicine, we talked about Dr. Bonnie Goldstein earlier. That is her book. It's a fabulous book if you want to go deeper and learn more about cannabis. But just from learning from her, what she's taught me and how she works with her families is, and this is some of it's common sense when you think about it too, is start low and go slow. So that could mean a couple of drops of a tincture. That could mean 5 mLs on the dropper. Most of them have measuring markers on the dropper nowadays. And it's almost like starting any kind of new drug or pharmaceutical. You start at a lower dose and you sort of work your way up. And if you don't see any effects, you can go a little higher. And if you're starting to see signs of intoxication, aka looking stoned or out of it, then you're giving too much, and that's too high of a dose, because you don't want that. You want the lowest effective dose is what we're aiming for here. And what I thought was really cool is I just recently got some numbers from Pennsylvania, and so this is just, I only can quantify the formulations that you're seeing here, the HOPE ones. There are many other things that patients with autism are taking here and across the world. But just in the doses, the amount, we know how many bottles were sold, how many tinctures were sold. I know generally how many doses are in a bottle, right? So if you count the ones in Pennsylvania and then, the other parts of the world, we're looking at close to 10 million doses of hope that have been safely administered. So I think, for me, it's like, if we want to know if cannabis is safe, we can sort of look at these numbers and say, okay, 10 million doses of tinctures have been administered, and they're fairly safe. I think it's safe to say that they're fairly safe. So that's a little bit about formulations and dosing on the practical side. This is a table from a research study that was done in Australia. And so they were measuring dosing and dose patterns and escalation. So it's a little bit of what I said before. They're starting at sort of a lower dose, and then they're increasing. And so here you can see they're breaking down THC, if you're interested to see like how much THC and what the average THC dose some people were taking is. But we're looking at, for patients under 16, really, for this particular product, their maintenance dose was 0.75 milliliters. And they're taking it, patients are taking it 2 to 3 times a day, typically. And again, it's very individualized, much like any other medication or pharmaceutical. You're going to have to work your way to your lowest effective dose. Accessing medical cannabis. So in Pennsylvania, you need to go to the Pennsylvania Department of Health website to register to be either a patient or a caregiver. A caregiver is someone who is a parent or other person that is assigned by a guardian to be able to purchase and administer medical cannabis to a patient. It's sometimes tricky to find a physician who will recommend. That's your treating physician. We happen to be in that situation now where our treating physician also recommends, but it's not the case. So unfortunately, you're typically going to have a one-off doctor who's going to recommend. There are certain doctors in Pennsylvania that we know of that are listed on the site, or even Alera Healthcare, and I think we have one in the back here who you can see for that, and there are certain doctors who will work deeper with you. So it's just, and it's also a matter of your preference too. If you want someone who maybe help you to navigate a little better, or you just want someone to formulate or to recommend for you. We often refer families to leafwell.com, and there's some cards over on the table for a discount. If you use our Hope Grows code, they give us a discount. They also make a donation to Hope Grows for Autism. Their medical director is a pediatrician, so we feel comfortable, sending patients there for that reason as well.
So I also just want to say, we're talking tonight about something that used to be sort of considered, at best, not mainstream, and at worst was sort of criminalized, and now it's more coming out to the light, and we're finding therapeutic uses for it. And what we're starting to see now, I just want to put this on your radar, because you're going to see it more and more, people are starting to use MDMA, psilocybin, and ketamine for the treatment of anxiety, depression, but also there's starting to be some studies and use of this in autism. So there's not a lot known about this right now, but I just want to sort of put it out there because it's been shown, there's been some preliminary information that indicates that this could be really helpful. I'm not suggesting that you all go grow shrooms in your yards or take tons of them, but in micro doses, people are starting to use this And this is another entity that, you know, had been seen sort of somewhat as therapeutic at one point, and then kind of like really went into a deep dive of people sort of maybe taking too much and tripping or having bad trips, and now, so it got a very bad reputation, but now people are beginning to take a second look and find out that in microdoses or in controlled environments that there's some evidence that it can completely reset, rewire, restart, and be very helpful therapeutically. So I don't have a lot of information about this tonight, but I thought I should just put it on your radar because it sort of comes from a similar kind of category historically, and there are practices even in this region that are starting to use this in all kinds of people, but also in kids and adults that are on the spectrum. So I don't know.
So I just want, if you're interested, this MAPS.org is a nonprofit organization. They're sort of the leading psychedelics information research. They do a lot of research with Johns Hopkins. So if you're interested, that's a really good place to kind of poke around and see what's going on. And you know, at Hope Grows, we're here to offer you resources. So definitely check out our website. We have a virtual support group that's on Facebook. So please join our virtual support group because as much as Wendy and I can, or Dr. Ross and I can sit here and sort of spew information at you or answer your question, in the group there's thousands of other parents and people who have tried it, so many other things, and have, you know, just a wealth of information. And it's also a really nice support system. Yeah, and that's kind of it. And if you have any questions, I'll let Wendy wrap up here. I forgot, sorry, one thing I wanted to mention. So Hope Grows is actually, I can announce it because our sponsor has confirmed. We'll be, in addition to these resources, we'll be launching a podcast in January. Thank you very much. Yes. I've been kind of hesitant and not, kind of thinking about it for quite a while, but it's on. So look for that, and we'll share more information about that in January.
And I just want to mention, I know I'm here giving the talk tonight, but I'm actually not a recommender. So I did actually take the course, but I never actually had the opportunity before COVID to get certified. So I wish I could, if you were looking for a recommender, I know it might seem like you could come to me, but I would not be, actually. And I have no, I just have to say again that I have no financial relationships with Hope Grows or earlier, which doesn't mean they're bad companies, it just means that I'm not getting paid. Or, I'm here just because I think it's sort of like a helpful resource. So, anyway, should we take questions? No? Okay. Does anybody have any questions, or, yes?
Do you find when a patient is using the medical marijuana, do they need to be on the other drugs that they've been on in the past, like Prozac and all those many things?
So I've seen a variety of things. I've seen some of my patients that are kids, maybe I keep them to their early 20s. I try to keep them longer, but I probably shouldn't because I'm just a pediatrician. But some of them end up not needing certain drugs, and some of them do come off all of their other medications, and some remain on a combination. So I guess I've seen the whole gamut of things. But that's no different than also, like, there are some patients that I have that are on the spectrum that might be on a stimulant for some ADHD symptoms and an SSRI for some anxiety or depression. So, frequently people are on more than one thing. So I wouldn't say this is a substitute for all typical medications, but I have seen it be very helpful, which is why I'm here tonight, and I think it's important that someone, I think it's super important, and I get a lot of information from families, but I think when a physician speaks about something like marijuana, I think it goes a long way to take away a lot of the stigma, which is part of the reason that and because I have sent a number of families, or had a number of families in my practice try it. So I know that isn't a satisfying answer, but I've seen a whole range, so I guess it's a whole range. So.